Hello, everybody. Welcome for joining us for this wonderful session on SMEs. How cyber safe are you? I'm Yogesh, Madaan, Head Cybersecurity, Data and Privacy for AMTD Digital. SMEs are the backbone of every economy and are the biggest employer of every market now. We have to digitize due to the COVID situation and due to the changing consumer demands. But as we know, many of those businesses are vulnerable, and we are worried about cybersecurity these days. They face many challenges, include budgeting, tools, processes, skills. And as per a survey conducted by Chubb, CHUBB, we believe 66% of these people are not aware of cyber threats. Majority of SMEs, which is 56% in Singapore, have faced a cyber attack in the last 12 months. 32% SMEs who experienced cyber incident did not know which data files were impacted. That's a huge number. Many SMEs in Singapore continue to be ill-equipped in defending themselves from cyber attacks. To explore this topic, we have our expert panelists with us today. Thank you very much, everybody. A warm welcome. To start with, my first panelist is Peter Meehan, who's the SVP International and Partnership IQ4 Corporation. IQ4 is a workforce and mobility platform that enables work-based learning. Also, Peter is co-founder of Cybersecurity Workforce Alliance based out of London. We have Dr. Carmit Yadin. She's co-founder and CEO of ArcusTeam. ArcusTeam has developed an ever-evolving threat elimination platform that blocks and eliminates cyber attacks before they threaten an enterprise, current and future connected networks. She's based out of Israel. We have Charles Ng. He's Executive Vice President, International Business and Consulting, Ensign InfoSecurity. Ensign InfoSecurity offers a region's largest pure-play cybersecurity expertise and innovation, with close to 600 cybersecurity professionals committed to innovation and strategic partnership across the globe. And he's based out of Singapore. We have Swee. Swee is an EXCO member of the Association of Small and Medium Enterprise in Singapore. He's also founder of TrueVA Capital, a digital strategy advisory investment and training business. He's based out of Singapore too, and he's our SME representative today. We have Gopal, who's the CISO for Auto Club Group, representing AAA brand with 60 million consumers in US. Gopal is cybersecurity strategist and a thought leader. He's based out of Michigan, US. Thank you very much, everybody. A warm welcome. So, starting with our SME representative today, Swee, what's your view on digitizing the SME offerings? What are the challenges you see from cybersecurity perspective in this digital era?
Thanks, Yogesh, and pleasure to be here. Well, indeed, it's an accurate observation that you made that the pandemic has highlighted the urgency for SMEs to digitalize their business models. In fact, the drive towards digitalization has started some years back with Singapore government agencies such as IMDA pushing for the SME Go Digital program. In our latest SME Microsoft SME Digital Transformation Study, we actually found that 80% of respondents were aware of the need for digital transformation, and that's a 23 percentage points increase from 2 years ago. And 83% of them also claim that they have strategies in place for digital transformation. These are all good. These are good positive trends. But what about the blind spots? I think the biggest challenges for SMEs, in my opinion, are two things. One, the inadequate awareness of cyber threats and its direct impact to the bottom line of their businesses. And number two, the lack of know-how and resources to implement robust measures to guard against cyber threats. Not just in terms of systems, but also in managing processes and training their people.
Great, good insight. So we all agree, I think, to these challenges, and 80% is a big number that people are aware, but then how can this be solved? So asking our next panelist, Dr. Carmit, how do you see these challenges and how do you advise these challenges to be addressed?
So thank you today for inviting me. It's definitely a pleasure. So first, I want to start that it's important to understand that attackers understand SMEs and their challenges, and they understand the digital transformation values for SMEs. They also understand that these services required expert and expertise, and that SMEs has less cybersecurity resources compared to large enterprise. So in my experience, you must be one step ahead of the attackers, and SMEs today can do that by these two approaches. So one, use a dedicated cybersecurity solutions for SME. In the past, we used to see that most of cyber solution has on-prem solutions and they're highly expensive. Today, we can see that the same problems can be solved with a cloud or SaaS solutions. And in most cases, it means that SMEs are getting the same value for low price. And the second approach is employee education. Many of the attacks, like social attacks and phishing, can be avoided through awareness and knowledge of the employees.
Great. So two-step approach here. All the good points. Peter, how can SMEs economically understand their risks, from what Dr. Carmit is saying, and adopt a robust cybersecurity response? Are there solutions out there that can help from solutioning perspective, from training and awareness perspective?
Certainly there is, and thank you for asking IQ4 and the CWA Cybersecurity Workforce Alliance to join in with this debate. There are definitely things out there that's very economic for small to medium enterprises to take up. I would class them as either free or inexpensive. My first counsel to them would be to go to the NIST.org website and download free guidance such as the standards-based critical infrastructure framework publication. This will help the SMEs fall in line with the major corporations that have already adopted this, and it builds a foundation for them to actually understand their risk posture, and then as they move forward, it will give them guidance on how to identify their assets and then how to protect them and detect things that are happening to them, and then go through the respond and recover phase. So the second thing that I would also suggest is go a stage further to the same website. It's also free. It's called the NICE Cybersecurity Workforce Framework. And this is, look up NCWF. It's a document out there. But what's fantastic about this is that it's a reference that describes the work roles and the work needed, together with the knowledge, skills, and ability to undertake how to adopt the NIST framework. So again, this is free. And it leverages a standardized cybersecurity taxonomy, which IQ4 and the CWA has already mapped, and we're able to produce career pathways and learning from that. It also helps educators to actually understand what it is their training and learning and their skills gap from academia. And this is something with the AWISE community in Singapore and Waterloo University we're working on. So the third thing, which is free, is to join the CWA movement. Get involved in a network of people that are bringing about a sea change in developing workforce skills. And when people actually get involved in this, they'll understand as an SME that they're probably a very vital part of a third-party risk to the large firms. So being able to get involved in this and invest in some training and development through work-based learning, for example, that will cut 3 to 9 months out of onboarding or upskilling time, that's the three things I would recommend. NIST framework, NCWF, and get involved with AWISE and CWA to bring about change.
Great. I think that definitely proves that how important standards are. Industry standards are not meant just for the big firms. They play a big role for the smaller companies too, for SMEs too. Thank you, Peter. So coming back to you, Swee, we see on the topic of supply chain risk and emerging threats, do you feel SMEs could be the weakest link in the value chain, especially when we are, we have digital payment ecosystem in place? What's the risk you see from your perspective?
With digitalization, corporates and their SME suppliers are becoming much more digitally interconnected. Mm-hmm. And, corporates in regulated industries like banks, telcos, I think they would normally have very stringent vendor onboarding criteria, which includes cybersecurity readiness. However, these are not the case with many mid to small size corporates. In fact, as more SMEs embark on the digitalization projects, they're exposing their own data to third parties, and due to the two major risks which I mentioned earlier, right, which are the lack of awareness and know-how, they're equally vulnerable to supply chain risks, as much as they themselves can be the weak link or the weakest link as vendors to large corporates.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, connecting with definitely a lot of vendors and exposing data, we have to see if we can be, or SMEs can be exploited through the third-party links. Charles, from your perspective, you do advise, you do help SMEs. What risks do you see, and how can these risks can be addressed?
Thanks, Yogesh, and could I just echo what the other panelists have pointed out? It's a real pleasure to be here. Let me begin by saying a few key things, right? I think it's quite important, and this is my experience in the past many years of talking to SME owners and the large corporates. The first thing is this: there's no point doing security if you do not know your digital future. Mm-hmm. When you have no sense of where you're going to go digitally, it's very easy to scare someone and say, "Oh, you got to do all this security," right? But you are buying things for an old business model. So it's really important to start by saying, I think what Siong mentioned that, right? You need to understand what your digital future is and then build security today. So that's something I'm telling lots of owners, lots of corporates. I say, look, you've got to know what your future is, what are the gains, what's the value you're going to get in the future. Then we talk about beyond the future. So that's really number one. The second thing is you mentioned a few things about data loss. And one of the first few incidents I did years ago, I was actually a florist shop, believe it or not. And there was this wealth management firm that gave a list of their top clients to the florist shop. So your wives, your children, and then if you were the top client, you got the best flowers, right? And so the hacker's really clever. He didn't have to hit the organization to get the list. He hit the florist shop. And then you got the full list of who are the best clients in the firm, etc., right? And so what's the real problem here? It's really two things, right? Number one, there is no more parameter. The SME needs to know you're on the war front, and there's no other way around it. But all of them and all of us struggle with two things as well. Number one, we don't have the right people and it's too expensive to get them. And the second thing, we don't have the right knowledge. What really is cyber? And for many SME owners in Singapore and Asia, cyber is really quite foreign. And it's a huge cost for them, and it's going to be like that for some time.
Great. I think all the good points, but as we discussed before, processes, budget, skills, stay one of the biggest issues SMEs have to deal with. So, Peter, coming to you, in this ever-changing cyber risk landscape, how do we advise SMEs to deal with these challenges they face from process, skills, awareness, budget perspective?
Certainly, I'd go back to my first answer, which is understanding the NIST framework and the importance of that. It's critical that they actually understand their assets at the first thing. From that, you can actually understand what you need to protect. Then you need to understand your risk profile and then your risk appetite. In other words, how much have I got to spend on solving this issue? So I would guide them back around basing things on standards and taking advice from friendly people that can actually help them make progress towards determining their stance and then the tools and technology that they would want to do. And it's important that they have the right skills in the right place. No point buying the tools unless they can have the right skills in place. That is, of course, unless they outsource the responsibility to somebody like Charles Group.
Yeah, absolutely. And all these processes, all these industry standards come for free. They don't have to pay for it. You can just go online and use this. Good point. So coming to Dr. Carmit, are there any specific tools, technologies, innovations which you see coming from Israel or from your word, which can help SMEs specifically?
So most of the companies that provide cybersecurity solution has the same technology as a SaaS solution. One of the main values for cloud is that it's elastic. It can increase and decrease based on the usage. And this architecture reduces the high cost we used to see today for on-prem solutions. So SME can have those technologies and enjoy similar values for less price. The provider today can sell the same values based on number of users in the system or the number of employees. And this approach in a new digitalization transformation reduced the cyber risks and reduce the cyber costs for SMEs and allow them to enjoy cybersecurity these days.
Great, good views, yeah. So in the beginning of the session, we discussed about, a lot of SMEs in Singapore, they were attacked last year. In fact, 56%, which is a big number. 56% of SMEs have experienced a cyber error or attack in last 12 months. That does not mean they were directly attacked, but that means, there were some fat finger error, or they were phishing, or there were some internal threat vectors due to which this happened. So, Charles, in your experience, what are the key reasons you see from cyber industry that these attacks happen?
Great question, Yogesh, and I think many of the experts on the panel will agree with me. It's very simple. It's the path of least resistance to attain maximum reward. If I were a hacker today and you want to hit an enterprise direct, many of us enterprises, and I'm sure Gopal can comment on that as well, given the scale of his business, we've mounted tremendous defenses. It's not perfect, but we're mounting more and more defenses. We're spending more, we're getting more away. So the best way to hit the key enterprises in a world where I said there are no more boundaries is to go for the path of least resistance. And you hit an SME for a few reasons. One, the monetary rewards. Two, you're trying to get to a larger corporate. Three, you're trying to use that as a means, or the infrastructure as a means to attain something else, as a bounce to attack something else, right? So there are multiple reasons for it. And the word SME is huge. It could mean, as I said, from a florist shop to a huge law firm, right? $400 million in revenue. So, but all these things are legitimate. And I would say that investigating some of these cases, the reasons range across the board with passwords, emails. It's really standard. Nothing about the attack is advanced. And I think that says something about in general the need to lift up literacy on cybersecurity across the board.
Yeah, well said. I think the basics are being exploited, path of least resistance. So we know, we come from that industry, we understand this, but what are the best ways to make SMEs aware of these issues and address some of the key issues? Peter, what are your views? How can we make SMEs aware these issues exist, path to least resistance? How can we bring training and awareness in the picture and give them that view?
Well, it starts with things like this that we're doing today. Is we need to broadcast it, we need to narrowcast it, we need to get them involved. I think press has and PR has a way of massaging this, but we see horror stories in the marketplace, but what we need to do is offer them a remedy as part of bringing that forward. But I would then, direct them into what can you do about it, and that is how economically can they do things about this. And from my perspective, because I'm involved in workforce and workforce development, I'd say, that is your weakest link. You have to start there, and from that you build awareness and build all of your resilience around your risk appetite and the assets you need to protect.
Definitely. So training and awareness, I think, plays a key role here. Are there any specific trainings, any specific sessions, topics which are being picked up in your part of the world, Dr. Carmit?
So I'll add on what Charles just said, and on top of people, I believe that the next important thing is education. The people in the companies must be familiar with the risk, and they must be familiar with the consequences, and they must know how to address those problems. Many of the cyber attacks can be solved by the right education to the people and to the employees, and they are the gateway in a lot of cases. So definitely an education.
Good insight. So we understand, as Peter said, I think workforce becomes kind of a factor which is affected. We have to see people are knowledgeable or not. Gopal, taking your views on, are there any specific initiatives which can be used for our SME friends to uplift the skills for themselves and their workforce?
Thank you for having me, and I'm honored to be here with the esteemed my colleagues here. Yes, I mean, when you're talking about the skilling of the people, right? I think what we're seeing in the industry is that you need to do two things. I mean, you need to, automation is going to make a lot of current jobs redundant. So one of the things that we are looking at is how can we reskill, because these are people with good skills, with good technology skills, right? How can we actually use them, because they understand the environment, they understand the business, right? So how can we reskill some of these people whose jobs is going to be automated, right? That's one thing. The second thing is building the new pipeline, right? So how can we bring in new students or new workforce, new employees into the SME and right? So that's one thing that we are looking at here, and that's one of the reasons why we have been involved in the cybersecurity workforce and the AYs, right, to address that problem, Yogesh. So
absolutely, thanks, Gopal. Very good insight. Charles, coming back to you, one of the key area we see is security operations, and we see how it has evolved from, let's say 10 years back. So if you look at the security operations and how they have changed over the last decade, what are the trends you see and you are seeing within the industry?
Thank you, Yogesh. And I point out a few things, right? Number one, I think increasingly we're going to see as I said in the first statement, you need to know your digital future in order to do security well. And increasingly, I think a lot of SME owners are now thinking about moving to the cloud. And we recently built a security operations center for one of the largest sort of tech unicorns in Asia. And they are fully cloud and cloud native. And to monitor off the cloud, may I say a few things? Right? Number one, there's going to be very little reason for an SME owner to buy or build any form of security outside of what can be integrated in the cloud and what is already provided by the CSP. CSP is cloud services, cloud providers, sorry. And that's the first thing, right? And number two, for many SME owners, you need to get your assets monitored. We need to be able to understand and see whether there's any sort of cyber attack on some of your laptops, your servers, etc. But when you move to a cloud, you have no more servers. But that's the thing, right? You need to get that monitored. And here's the thing: beyond just getting it monitored, there needs to be a response option. In case if there's any incident, you need to be able to respond. So I think quite critically, if that's the digital future for many SMEs, for cost savings, for agility, for the need to compete, then you start moving to a cloud provider where you have an integrated sort of security suite tools, and then you can pick and choose and decide what you want. Then you need to have an operations as a service. If you employ your own security person, it's super expensive, and he's probably going to be uniquely focused on one or two parts of a huge security suite of services or skills that's required. So you probably need security as a service at a reasonable cost in order to manage the assets that you have. Quite critically, there's a couple of things that every SME owner needs to know. Number one, what is your critical asset? I think Peter mentioned that before. How much of those assets are client sensitive information? How does the client require that to be monitored and taken care of, right? That's really important because that affects your business. And I know of many SMEs in Singapore that deal with many of these sensitive data sets. And also at the same time, operational disruption from much larger clients. So, is that on the cloud? Is that on-prem? How are you going to monitor that? Because once that's transited over you, there may be a series of SLAs or contractual requirements, right? And the second thing is your own personal assets. Where is that? Are you going to put it on the cloud? And if you have sort of regional offices, each region may have very different approaches to how that data has to be addressed, and therefore monitoring may change. But I'm safe. I think one thing we can say is monitoring will change if you start moving to the cloud.
Definitely, I think monitoring plays a big role. I think, which is definitely a proactive type of control. It's not a reactive control. Good point, Charles. Peter, coming to you now. Charles talked about a few factors from NIST. How an incident is reported, monitored, responded, dealt with. How have these frameworks evolved? What is your view on these security operations and how they have changed over the last decade?
There's a number of factors in that. Certainly when we got involved as co-chair of the NICE taxonomy in 2015, we were asked by the government to take this across the whole of the private sector. So in 2016, 2017, we added 161 rows of additional knowledge, skills and abilities to protect the telecommunications space. We added something like 32 rows which came from European banks because European jurisdiction wasn't considered there. We're now working with the Department of Transport. We're embarking here in the UK on work regarding operational technologies. So what you're going to see is a standards-based approach being adopted by sectors. And once you have that, you'll have the interchange of supply chains working from a level of understanding. The other trend that we're seeing emerge and accelerate is one of employers looking to hire people based on skills-based interviews and assessments. In fact, IBM recently stated in a meeting I was in that they hired 15% of their workforce last year through this approach. And the reason is that it's very difficult to tell from a CV how good somebody is. You want to assess somebody and bring them in. So the other thing we're seeing is everybody wants a unicorn that doesn't exist. They need people with so much experience. So employers are looking for people with 6 months of work experience before they even join. And that's an impossibility when you're looking at the next generation workforce that's coming down the track. So what we're doing is combining work-based learning with academic learning, as we're proposing with AWISE and community in Singapore with Waterloo University. But the whole idea is we're seeing people move from just buying their next experts from education, but building this talent pipeline and using work-based models along the lines that we're suggesting, all wrapped around standards-based learning.
I think for any SME, for any big firm, this security operations center becomes very, very critical. And SMEs, they look at us. They look at us and see, what do you advise? Should we create our own security operations centers? Should we outsource these to different vendors who can do it? So Charles, as you said, you have done it for vendor recently. So what's your view? What's your advice to our SME friends?
Don't do it yourself. Don't do it yourself. I think, and the reason for that is there's no way the core of a SME business is not to do security. The core of the SME business is to provide value for its business partners and its clients and its customers, right? And there is a reason why, for very large organizations, it's a bit different. For an SME, leverage the services, leverage it. There's a range of options. Ensign, we run the largest SOC in Asia. But even then, right, there's a range of options when it comes to the services that an SME may want to procure. And I will add a few things, right? For an SME, train your people hard, give them awareness. It's going to be really, really critical. Because 80% of the attacks can be stopped with an alert user. I think most of us in this panel, right? And the second thing is, if you need to, get cyber insurance. It's going to help at the right time. And number 3, basic level of, some form of cybersecurity, of antivirus and all that is already very helpful. These are the simple things I would advise in SME.
Great. Thanks, Charles. So I think I see monitoring, I see training and awareness, standards, frameworks are key. But when we compare small and bigger organizations, Gopal, coming to you, does size of an organization matter when it comes to cyber attacks? Given the constraints of talent and resources, what areas of cybersecurity should small and medium enterprise focus on?
Thanks, Yogesh. I think that's a great question, and I'm going to say most of the other panelists, including Carmit, said. I think Charles, don't try to build it yourself. So I think I'm going to focus on 3 things here. Let's look at the definition of a small and medium business coming from. I'm going to use Gartner. Every country has got its own definition, but I'm going to use Gartner. Gartner defines a small industry as companies with less than 100 employees and then with revenue of less than $50 million US. A medium business is any employee size from 100 to 999 with a revenue of greater than 50 million to less than $1 billion US. And large organizations are organizations with greater than 1,000 employees and greater than $1 billion in revenue. Now, absolutely, look at the numbers, right? Because if you look at your revenue and the resources, there is absolutely a difference when it comes to what you can do with what you have when it comes to the SMEs, right? The size does matter in terms of resources that you have, right? So to answer your question, size does matter. Let's look at facts, right? So we now have If you look at the attack history, how organizations are attacked over the last 13 years, we have a lot of extremely good data. So one of the things that I want to ask the SMEs is to look at data-driven decisions. When they're making a decisions, what is actually going to give them the best bang for their buck? 99.9% of the attack was exploited using a known existing vulnerability that existed for more than 1 year. So your understanding of a vulnerability on your endpoint and how to fix that endpoint is going to be extremely critical. Over 95% of the attacks leverage some kind of credential harvesting and privilege escalation. So having a good understanding of the digital identities, because if you're dealing digital, everything is tied to a digital identity. So having an extremely good handle on your digital identity is important. Over 97% of the attacks was leveraged because of a human vulnerability, like a phishing or a social engineering. So the cybersecurity awareness of your employees, right? And also the right behavior. I'm calling it hygiene. It's not just the behavior, is practice of good hygiene absolutely become important. And the other interesting fact that we are seeing based on data is 68% of the attacks happen within minutes, because attacks are happening at machine speeds. I think Carmit talked about, she's aware of how attacks happen, right? So we now know that 68% of the attacks happen within minutes, but it takes months for an organization to actually know that you're being attacked. So those are the 4 areas that I think is key. And I think given the shortage of resources and talent, my recommendation is don't try to build it yourself. Yeah, 15 years ago, that would have been a good advice. But today, with service offering like software as service, there are some amazing security offerings. You can build it on the cloud as SaaS offering. So unless you're really brave, I'm not preventing people from building it, but if you are brave and you want to try it, please go ahead and try it. But most likely you're going to fail based on the information that we have, because you're not going to get that kind of expertise in-house if you just have 50 employees in your organization. So try to leverage existing services, look at the market, right, and get these things. The other thing, the third aspect that I want to, what is the industry doing about this, right? So it's just, how is the industry helping? What is the way forward, a long term, right? So we are seeing supply chain is becoming a real concern for everybody, and we are seeing ecosystems that's being built in. I'll give you a few examples. In the financial services, in the US, the 5 major banks have come together and created something known as TrueVA, right? And in Europe, there's IHS Market, right? And I think AMTD has this vision of Spider-Man, creating a right ecosystem. So industry is actually looking at helping the SMEs, building these ecosystems. Large corporations, right, are looking at creating these ecosystems. We are also seeing, so that is one aspect that we are seeing emerging, the building of ecosystems that protects everybody. The other interesting aspect that I'm seeing is this concept of cybersecurity, using data, right, real data, public data to understand your cybersecurity posture, right? So we are seeing cybersecurity scorecarding or risk determination with technologies like BitSight, Risk Recon, and Security Scorecard. And you can actually get a fairly good idea about where your weaknesses are on public data. So I think those are some of the advices that I would give SMEs. Remember those 3 things that I talked about.
Amazing. I think, again, when it comes to attacks, I think hackers do not differentiate between smaller organizations and SMEs or the bigger organizations. Wherever they see a vulnerability, they will get in. So we have to be ready from our perspective to stop hackers from spoiling our own businesses. Thank you, Gopal. Thank you very much. So I want to make sure, our SME audience, our SME friends, they understand what we are saying and the takeaway from our experts that what they should do. So if you have to advise any one key thing to these SMEs and why they should do it, what would that be? Starting with you, Charles.
I would say the key thing above all things else is people. All things else is people, and trust me, training is free. And I would say that, if the people are aware, a huge part of the problem is solved. And I totally echo what Gopal said. He mentioned the 4 areas and said, don't do it yourself. I'm totally with him on this. And get your people to understand cyber. It's an investment that's worth it. There isn't much to it. And subsequently, don't do it yourself.
Okay, so people, making sure we invest in people. We have the right people in the organization to do all this. Dr. Carmit, what's your advice?
I'll complete what Charles just said, and on top of people, I'll add education, because from my experience, I understand and I know that once the employees are trained and they are aware, you can avoid many of the attacks exists today. So have a good people, what Charles said, and I'm saying make sure that they are well educated on the cyber attacks and the threats that are out there.
Great. So people and making sure they're educated. We have the right trainings for them, so they're ready for any attacks. Gopal, what's your advice?
Yeah, I think I'm going to echo what both Carmen and right, but I'm going to face this differently. Focus on endpoints, and not only your system endpoints, but also the human endpoints. So you should consider your humans as endpoints because they are an attack vector. So I think going back to what Carmit said, right? I mean, education and also understanding your endpoint and protect both your human endpoint and your technology endpoints. No matter where they are, whether it's on-prem, cloud, it doesn't matter, right? So protect your endpoints, human and machine.
Great. And Swee, in your experience, I think you have talked to experts before, you have seen these attacks, you have talked in these forums. What do you see is the most important thing?
I think for SME owners, right, the first thing you need to do is to be acutely aware and acutely familiar with the cyber risks that your business is facing, right? And I would echo, many of the panelists as well. I think what's important is to seek expert advice, right? Don't do it yourself, right? Seek expert advice to put in place appropriate processes and solutions. Obviously, this will involve people, right? Whether it's yourself and building the awareness, whether it's your people, because having the best process or solutions in place without the appropriate training of the people, the hackers or the cyber criminals are still gonna exploit the weakest link.
Yeah, definitely can't agree more. We have to agree if there is a problem. We have to understand. We have to accept it. If there's a problem, only then we can solve it. Thank you very much. Peter, what's your opinion on this?
Thank you. Well, unsurprisingly, I'm going to echo what everybody else has said. It's about workforce because that's where I come from. And if you think about this, hackers don't need a 2-year or 4-year degree to be very successful. But I'd like to blow up some myths in this area of workforce and cybersecurity skills. It is down to skills. Whether it's the skills in your outsourcing party, they need the skills and they have difficulty finding skills. And the landscape's always going to change. And jobs will appear that we don't even have titles for now. So the other point I'd like to make is that around skills, for those people that are not involved in this and SMEs are considering the types of people they need to hire, there are absolutely fantastic careers in cybersecurity and risk. And bear in mind that cybersecurity doesn't equal technical and tools.
Yeah.
Because in a risk controls framework, I understand there's about 18 controls and only 4 of them actually require you to have some technical competency. So if you're going to build what we've been discussing here, a cyber awareness program for 230,000 people or 1,500 people or whatever it might be, you don't need somebody with pen testing experience. You probably need a marketeer, someone or an educationalist, but they can adopt and learn into this particular world. And, the other thing is studies are showing that 85% of a hiring decision is based on soft skills. And this leads me to the point that perhaps I'd like to wrap up on is that the reason we've got involved with AMTD, the AppWise community in Singapore to launch in Singapore, is that it's this soft skills, this understanding of the world that we're living in and how to handle things, particularly leveraging the NIST framework. But the way that you can do this is via scale. And just on the final point, that we started in 2015, we've done over 5,000 learners so far. 30% went into jobs, and that's quite remarkable after only just over 1% knew that there was a job in security. So we can collectively get together and bring about a change to build this talent pipeline. And just leaving it there, that's why you will see announcements coming forward as to the launch in Singapore and the scaling of workforce education and development over there.
Great points. I mean, finding critical assets, cyber hygiene, taking care of your people, education, awareness, initiatives like Advise in Singapore, endpoint protection, including human endpoints, as Gopal said. Peter mentioned framework, standards, how important they are. Awareness of cyber risk, very important. Workforce, how do we reskill our workforce? All great points. I think in the interest of the time, we cannot go ahead and ask more questions. This is a very wonderful chat going on. We'll try in the future to have such sessions. But for now, thank you very much for joining us for this wonderful session, sharing your valuable inputs with us, where we can ensure that SMEs have taken something home today. They have learned something today. They can implement that in practical life. For our audience, we are happy to help with any questions you may have. You can reach us at y@amtdgroup.com. I repeat that, y@amtdgroup.com. Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate that. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Thanks for having me.
Take care.
Bye-bye.